all comes back to this idea that I just wanted to travel. I wanted to go to different places. And the more I did that, the more I liked it. And the more I liked it, the more I wanted to do it and see different places and do different things. I know people who've never left their hometown, never gone anywhere, and they're happy. So great, brilliant, good luck to you. But I'd never wanted to do that. I always wanted to get out and do something different.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode number 54 of the Immigrants Life podcast, where we share stories of people who left their country to chase a better life. And through these stories, you can find ideas, resources, and motivation to do the same. I'm Daniel De Biasi, and in this episode, we are going to cover another way you could use to move abroad. I interviewed many people who started a new life abroad as students. In most countries, getting a student visa and staying in the country is one of the easiest options, but it's also one of the most expensive ones. My guest this week left his country, England, not as a student, but as a teacher, an English teacher to be precise. I met many other people that did the same thing, and as you will hear in my conversation with Stephen, teaching English abroad is another great way to explore the world and start a new life abroad. In fact, teaching English abroad is a high-demand job, especially if you are a native English speaker. Some companies only allow application from teachers with passport from English-speaking countries. But if English is your second language, don't get discouraged because 80% of the English teachers around the world are not native English speakers because there are just not enough of them. In this episode, Stephen will share his story on how he became an English teacher and traveled around the world and found his new home in Brazil. Stephen has been teaching English for over 20 years, and his podcast, English with Stephen, is designed to teach you the language not in the usual boring way, but through a very interesting story to make it easier for you to remember things. And now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you here. I think you got a great story and a great experience for the listener. So I'm happy to have you here.
I hope so. I hope they enjoy it.
Sweet. Okay, should we maybe start from, say, where are you originally from and where you're right now?
Okay, so originally I grew up in Birmingham in the Midlands of the UK. Currently, for the last 10 years, I've been living in Curitiba, a city in the south of Brazil. In between those two, I've lived in various places, travelled around bits and pieces. So yeah, Brazil at the moment.
And what age did you decide to leave England then?
I remember being a child and dreaming of travelling around. But when I actually left the UK, I was about 22, just after university. 22, yeah, I think I was 22 when I left for the first time.
What was the reason why did you decide to leave England?
I wanted to travel. I always had this idea. I wanted to get out of Britain and see different places, experience different things. And it was always something that was high up on my list of things I wanted to do. Always one of my dreams for my life.
Okay, so your idea was just, I'm in England, I just want to travel around. And then after traveling, I'm just going to go back and carry on with my life in England?
I assumed so, I didn't really have any hard and fast plans. I assumed I'd spend a couple of years going around doing things and then drift back to Britain. I didn't really have much of a plan, a medium or a long-term plan, to be honest. But yeah, that was probably the assumption, that I would end up back in Britain doing something.
And how did you manage to leave England? What was the process? How did you get out of England and where did you go?
Well, wanting to travel the world is one thing. Being able to pay for it is a different matter entirely.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have the money to travel around. So I remember I was at a party, while I was still at university, I was at a party and I met two people who'd just come back from Prague in the Czech Republic. And they'd been teaching English there. And I got talking to them at this party and they were saying, it's a piece of cake. It's dead easy. All you have to do is a 4-week course called CELTA. And with this certificate that you get from this course, you can go and teach English almost anywhere in the world. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good plan. So I did my CELTA. It's a course from, there's a Cambridge University course and a Trinity College course. Trinity College is in London as well. And I did the Trinity College course. They're equivalents, but Trinity College was a little bit cheaper than the Cambridge course. And I got a job. I got a job in Poland. That was my first job. And so away I went. And the reason I chose Poland was they were the first people to offer me a job. So I went every minute of it. And here I am, 25 years later, still teaching English.
So at that point, you have no experience teaching either English or any other thing. So you never teach in your life before. And you did like this course is called CELTA. And for the listeners that are listening here, it's called SELTA. That's
so
the course.
CELTA. It's the CE. It's a Cambridge, certificate in English language teaching to adults.
Okay.
Yeah, I had never taught anything. My degree at university was in politics and economics. So that has nothing to do with language. I'd studied English at school until I was 18. I loved reading. I loved it. I still love literature. But I had no formal training or education in either language or how to teach. It was just this 4-week course, which you learn a lot because it's an intensive course, but you don't learn everything about teaching. You basically learn how to survive.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. Like when you learn how to drive, it's not that once you got the license, you're a pilot. It's like you're not like a racing driver.
Absolutely. You only start learning how to drive after you've passed your test.
Exactly. So how was your experience when you landed into Poland? People were speaking different language, probably different culture, and you got into like a brand new career. What was your experience like teaching in Poland?
I still remember my very first class, and I was 22 and my students, it was a state school and all my students were 18 or 19 years old. I was only a little bit older than them, really.
Exactly.
I remember going to my first class and they were all standing in a line outside the classroom waiting for me to turn up, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'd stayed up the night before, all night trying to figure out a lesson plan, what to teach. I was racked with nerves. And looking back, I tried to be a friend to them. I wasn't a traditional teacher. They liked me, but I think they liked me because I wasn't this teacher who told them to sit down and do what I was just chatting to them in English. I was hired to teach the students who had a higher level of English. So the more advanced students, which basically meant we had conversations. We chatted. I don't know how much I actually taught them, but I gave them an opportunity to use English. But looking back, I wasn't a great teacher in that first year. It was a matter of surviving in the classroom and just to keep going and not kill anybody, basically.
I'm kind of curious though, like how did they see you? Like you are this English speaker from England coming to Poland to teach English. Were you like seeing you like differently just because you were English? They were like seeing you like as this interesting character, an interesting person, or like even professional, like in a different way, just because you come from an English-speaking country?
So there was two different things. I was living in a very small town. Well, for me, it was a small town. It was 10,000 people. The city I come from was 1 million people. So going to a small town like that was different. But there was 2 English teachers in the town from England. I mean, 2 British English teachers, and everybody knew us. We were like mini celebrities in the town because it was a small place. It was out in the countryside that didn't get many foreigners going there. And so to have 2 British people living in the town was something unusual. So the people in the town, they knew me. I went into a bar and everybody knew me. So on that level, I was separate, and also it was unusual for me in that way that everybody knew me, because coming from a big city, nobody knows you. You are totally anonymous. But in terms of inside the school, the other English teachers, God, they were so good to me. They were the ones who got me through that first year. So I'm talking here about English teachers who were Polish, who knew far more about teaching than I did, who also had the history. Some of them have been teaching for 20, 30 years. I know because I got to know them very well that when I went, jealous is the wrong word, but they were slightly resentful that these 2 British people were going there and, if not more money, at least the same money as them. We didn't know what we were doing. They were having to hold our hands. They were so helpful. And by the end of the year, we were friends. So that had gone. But it wasn't right that we should be getting the treatment that we got compared to what they were getting. Personally, I know I didn't teach as much as they were teaching. And they had degrees in teaching. They had studied speak English. They could speak Polish. One of them could speak German as well. They knew a lot more about language and language teaching than I did. But we were these celebrity English experts. Well, a part of it was marketing as well. The school could say, we've got these English speakers. So part of it was that as well. And that is something that's happened at other times in my career as well.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Even I, coming from a small town, I can definitely see, as a person like you coming from another country speaking English, that would be like, oh my God, this person is so cool.
Yeah.
So what was your the experience? You went to travel, so you left the UK to travel around the world. Was this first experience fulfilling that, I wanted to travel?
I absolutely loved it. I don't have one bad word to say about Poland. I absolutely loved the place. Because I was working at a state school, I was entitled to half price travel on trains. And I made the most of it. I traveled all over Poland. I visited big cities, small cities. I had a wonderful time. The people were amazing. I never had a bad encounter with, no more than you get with anybody from anywhere else. But most of the time, people were welcoming. They were open, extremely friendly, always trying to get me to eat something else. Food was very important. No, I had a wonderful time in Poland. And that just spurred me on and motivated me to look for another job teaching. The only problem I had with Poland, was it's so cold. It was just ridiculously cold. I think it was a bad winter, but we had snow from the beginning of November through to April, and that just got on my nerves after a while. I know you live in Canada, you have to get used to it, but that was just too much for me, just so cold.
So after 1 year teaching in Poland, what was your next step from there?
Well, I wanted something different. Once you've been teaching for a year with your CELTA, you are a lot more in demand because with driving. After a year of driving, you can drive. After a year of teaching, I could do more than survive in the classroom. So I wanted to go further afield. At university, I had traveled around Spain. I'd gone to other European countries. I'd been to Mexico. So I've been to the Americas. So I was like, right, I want to go to Asia. And I went to an agency in London that matches teachers to companies, schools around the world. And they offered me 3 places. One was in South Korea, one was in Thailand, and one was in Taiwan. I was very interested in Thailand. It's an exotic country. It's famous for tourists and beaches. I was minded to take that job. But they told me, look, you can take it. You can have it. It's your job. No problem. However, would you think about going to Taiwan? If you go to Taiwan, we will pay you a lot more money. We will give you the plane ticket to get out there. What I understood was that everybody wanted to go to Thailand. And it was more difficult for them to get people to go to Taiwan. So they had to offer this better package. And the package was very, very good. So I went to Taiwan. And I was working in the capital, Taipei, for a year. And that was another amazing experience.
Or must be even then a culture shock, a culture so different, and all of that must be even at the young age. At that point, we're probably 23, 24?
23, 24, yeah.
So it's still pretty young, coming from British culture and Europe, going to Asia, to China would be mind-blowing.
Totally. I was very lucky that the school was very helpful. The school was a big school, a lot of branches around Taiwan, and their marketing was that they only had native speaker English teachers. So people from the States, from Britain, from Australia, things like this. So there was a good community there of other teachers. But that is the first time and the biggest time that I've had this culture shock where everything has been different. Even in Poland, I couldn't understand the language when I got there, but I could read signs and I could guess what some of the words were. There are words which are similar between Polish and English. Maybe they come from Latin roots, or there's a French word, or it's an English word which has been borrowed into Polish. So, you could guess some of the things that people were saying or read things. But Taiwan, couldn't read a thing, didn't understand the thing. The language is totally different. There are no similarities between the two languages. The food is different. The smells are different. The way they work, everything is different. So it was a shock. Not a bad shock. I had a great time in Taiwan, but it was the one time when I've been completely out of my comfort zone.
Do you find any differences in like teaching in other countries, like in Poland at the time, and teaching in China, teaching in Taiwan, or was pretty similar?
Poland, we had a lot of freedom to do what we wanted. We didn't have many resources, which was a problem for a new teacher because I didn't have anything to use. So I had to try to create things myself. In Taiwan, we were a lot more restricted. We had to follow a book, but we had a lot of resources. We even had teaching assistants inside the classroom, especially for lower levels and for children, so that they could translate if there was something that needed to be translated. We had a lot more resources in Taiwan. In Poland, it was a state school, and the school was, I don't know, it must have been the building itself, the physical building must have been 100 years old. In Taiwan, we were just in an office block. We had a whole floor of an office block. And so it was new, it was modern, it was designed, the interior was designed for a school, so there's small classrooms. We had a well-stocked teacher's room we could photocopy things. It was very difficult to photocopy things in the state school in Poland. So they are almost chalk and cheese. And then in Taiwan, the fact that we just were different, the culture is different. Until I opened my mouth in Poland, nobody knew I was a foreigner. Whereas in Taiwan, everybody knew I was a foreigner just by looking at me, obviously. And that translated to the students. A lot of the students had never seen or interacted with a non-Taiwanese person before. And so that had an impact as well.
So you still feel like a little celebrity even in Taiwan?
I don't know about celebrity. I mean, my visa, I said on my visa I was an English expert, which I definitely wasn't. Still not by that point. I think by the end of my year in Taiwan, I was a much better teacher. Because of all the support we had and there were other experienced teachers, I was much better at the end of the second year. But in Taiwan, if I had a student in my class, they'd talk to me. It was not a problem. Outside the class, they just wouldn't talk to me. They'd turn around and run away because there's this, it's a cultural thing about saving face, about not making mistakes, about being, if they're talking to me in front of their friends, they're going to stand out more. And that's something that they don't want to do. They want to be normal like other people. That's not everybody, of course. There are exceptions. And I made some good Taiwanese friends. But as a rule, that's what happened. That's what happened to me there in Taiwan. I was a celebrity, but for different reasons, just because I was so different. I mean, Taipei is a huge city, so it's very different to where I was in Poland. It's a very big, modern city. It's relatively cosmopolitan, especially where I was, which was near the university. But, you know, you do stand out. It's the first time in my life. In Britain, we have multicultural cities. My city is very multicultural, but being a white person in Britain, that's the norm, that there are more white people than anything else. In Taiwan, I was the minority, and it was strange having people looking at me if I got onto a bus, because a lot of the Europeans and the Americans, they're there to do business, so they get taxis from one place to another. I wasn't doing that. I was getting buses. I was doing what normal local Taiwanese people were doing. And that was different as well. You know, that they might see an American, but he's getting in a taxi or he's going to a bar or a restaurant. I was on the bus sitting next to them. That was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, that must have been. So after 1 year in Taiwan, actually, could you decide if stay longer, or the contract was for a year and then you have to pick somewhere else?
No, the contract was for a year and they wanted me to stay. But I didn't want to stay longer. First of all, I wanted to go somewhere else. And I felt that after a year in Taiwan, the language was really difficult for me. After a year, I had enough Chinese to be able to survive, go to restaurants and things like this. But after about 6 or 7 months, I was like, right, if I'm going to stay here longer than a year, I need to really study the language. And they say that you need to live there and study for 3 years before you can read a newspaper. And I was like, I don't want to be here for 3 years just to be able to read a newspaper. So I was like, okay, at the end of my contract, my year's contract, I'm going to leave. And then that had the knock-on effect. That's like, so that means I don't really need much more language. So I stopped studying and I didn't learn a lot of Chinese as much as I possibly could have. So yeah, after a year, they wanted me to stay. It's difficult finding new teachers. So they were trying to encourage me to stay, but I said, no, I'm off. And I went back to Britain for the summer and figured out what to do next.
And after 2 years living abroad, was still your idea keep traveling, or your idea or your like a goal in life has changed at that point?
No, no. And that by the end of my second year, I was like, right, I'm going to teach. This is me for the foreseeable future, for the medium term. I'm going to teach. I'm going to go somewhere else. At that point, I was thinking about getting a Delta. So we talked about CELTA, which is the certificate. That's the entry level examination or course to become a teacher. The Delta is the next level, and it really is the next level. You need to have at least 3 years experience, and it's a much longer course, and it's a lot more in-depth and detailed. And at the end of my second year, I was thinking about this, right, I'm going to do another year teaching, and then I'm going to do my Delta. So I was making plans for teaching to become my job, my real job, not just something I was going to do for a couple of years to pay the bills while I traveled.
So now your goal becomes like, okay, I'm not going to stay in England because teaching English is probably for you, teach English to foreign people, not teach English to English speaker, right?
Absolutely. I was teaching English to speakers of other languages, not teaching English in schools and state schools, traditional schools, not teaching English literature or anything like that. No, I wanted to teach English to speakers of other languages. That didn't mean I couldn't do it in Britain. There are lots of English schools in Britain where the students come from around the world and they go to London or Oxford or some other place to learn English there. And I did that later on, but that still wasn't what I wanted to do. I still wanted to travel as well.
So what was your third year? Where did you do your third year?
My third year was in Curitiba, in Brazil. Again, I went to an agency and I said, this time I want to go to South America. And that was more problematic, being a British person, because in South America, they're more focused on American English rather than British English. And so American teachers are more in demand. But this agency found three jobs for me. One was in Mexico. And I didn't want to go to Mexico because I'd already traveled around Mexico and it's not South America. So it's like, no, I'm not doing Mexico. The other one was in Argentina, a city called Rosario. And then this one was in Curitiba, here in the south of Brazil. And they offered me these three places literally about a week after Argentina had beaten England in the World Cup of football. And I was like, right, I don't want to go to Mexico because I've been to Mexico. I do not want to go to Argentina because they just beat us in the football. So I'll go to Brazil.
That's a great way to pick a country.
In-depth research. Yeah, So I came to Brazil and I was here for a year. I was really fortunate. The school I was working at was brilliant. The owner of the school, a little bit crazy in some ways, but she was so supportive to all her teachers. She challenged everybody to be the best teacher they could be. And I think in my first year of teaching, I learned how to do more than survive in my first year. In my second year, I learned, okay, I love teaching and I can do this. At the end of my third year, I know what I'm talking about now. At the end of the third year of teaching, I was confident I could teach anybody in any circumstances with minimal time to prepare. After 3 years of teaching, I felt like a teacher.
So I got the third year in Brazil. Then you went back to the UK to get the Delta, or did you stay in Brazil?
So I went back to the UK to do my Delta. I got a job at a school in London where it was an English school. They taught students, but they also did teacher training. So they provided the Delta in their school. So I stayed there, and that meant I could do it part-time. I think it was 2 evenings a week in the same school. And that took, if I remember rightly, I can't remember if it's 6 months or 9 months doing that to get my Delta. And I realized doing my Delta that I was totally wrong, that I didn't know how to teach at the end of 3 years. I was okay, but there was so much that I didn't know. And it was the Delta really that cemented all the ideas that I had, changed a lot of ideas. And I was a different teacher by the end of that experience. Not just the Delta, but being with because it's a school that does teacher training, it means that there are lots of experienced teachers there to do the training. So I learned a lot on the Delta. I learned a lot from being with these experienced teachers who had traveled all over the world, who had 10, 15, 20 years experience of teaching English, who were interested in different methodologies and different aspects of teaching. The Delta and that teaching in Britain for a year was the making of me as a teacher, I think. When I was in Brazil before, to go back to a question you asked before, was I treated differently? Yes, I was treated very differently. if there was a question about language amongst the teachers, do we say this? Do we say that? Stephen, what do we do? At the beginning of the year, I didn't know. I was making it up. I was like, oh, well, maybe we do this. At the end of the year, I was more comfortable with it after a year of being asked. But I was asked to give teacher training courses or methodologies. I didn't know about teacher training courses, but because I was English, it was assumed I knew about how to do teacher training courses as well. I learned how to do it, but I didn't know how to do it at the beginning.
So the way they treat you differently, they treat you more like as a professional. Like I feel like they saw you like this professional figure that they were like you should know everything about teaching and teaching English.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Not everybody. Some people knew. They knew, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah. I mean, I learned a hell of a lot, but I learned as much from the Brazilian teachers about how to work in a classroom. I learned so much from them than they learned from me. Totally.
Seems like even at this point, you're still pretty young, 25, and still like I'm surprised and impressed by your way to navigate into the circumstances. Like, okay, I don't know much about it and try to pretend I know what to do. And just honestly, I'm pretty impressed like the way you navigate into the first 3 years of your teaching experience.
I suppose it's being young and naive. You don't know what you don't know. And you just say, yeah, okay, I can do it. There's also, the fact that other people treat you well because you're this British teacher, that you can get away with a lot of stuff that perhaps you wouldn't be allowed to get away with. And that's not fair. It's totally not fair that I was given these privileged positions. I didn't deserve those positions at all, but I was given them. And I didn't realize at the time how privileged I was. I didn't realize that perhaps this was not normal. But again, that's being young and naive and just, you can do anything when you don't think about it. Nowadays, my God, I'm not sure I would do that again. But at the time, I just did it.
Why?
I don't know, really. I think it all comes back to this idea that I just wanted to travel. I wanted to go to different places. And the more I did that, the more I liked it. And the more I liked it, the more I wanted to do it and see different places and do different things. I know people who've never left their hometown, never gone anywhere, and they're happy. So great, brilliant, good luck to you. But I'd never wanted to do that. I always wanted to get out and do something different.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. So you're still back in England, you got your Delta, and then I guess then you decided to move back to Brazil.
Yes, so I came back to Brazil for a year, back to the same place, back to the same school. Partly because of the school, but partly because I met a girl the first time I was in Brazil. And so I went back to see what would happen there. And now we're married and we have a son. So it was obviously the right decision to make. And I stayed there for another year. And this time I was given a lot more formal responsibility, and I wanted that responsibility. I wanted to use what I'd learned on the Delta, put it into practice, and it was a great year for me personally. At the end of that, my wife, well, now she's my wife, but she was still my girlfriend, she got an opportunity to do a master's in law in Essex University in England. So she went to England to do that. I went back to England as well. I wasn't with her. She was in Essex. I was in London. That's about an hour's drive away, but we met up over the weekends and things like this. And so, I was back in London teaching again, loving it, loving life, loving classes, having a great time. After my wife finished her master's, she got an opportunity to work in Washington for a year. Because we weren't married, I wasn't able to join her. So I stopped teaching and I went and did a master's in linguistics. I took a year out. I went back home to my mom and dad's house and I studied linguistics for a year, which again was brilliant. I learned so much through studying for a master's.
So at this point, your girlfriend was in Washington in the US, you were in England.
Yes.
You were separated for that year.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after that, you guys moved together back to Brazil?
Yeah.
How did you manage to...
So we decided that we wanted to make a go of it, and we had to decide, were we going to live in Britain or live in Brazil? For my wife, it would have been very hard for her to live in Britain because she had a law degree. She passed the bar exam in Brazil, but she wouldn't be able to practice law in Britain. So we decided that it's just much easier to go and live in Brazil. So we got married because moving to Brazil is a complex and complicated procedure, but it's much easier if you're married to a Brazilian. Mm-hmm. That's not why we got married, but we were ready to get married anyway. So we got married, moved to Curitiba. Then my wife got a job in Rio. So we moved to Rio for 5 years, and I was teaching all the time, teaching at schools. Towards the end of my time in Rio, I left the school and I became a private teacher, just working for myself. And then 10 years ago, we moved to Curitiba when my son was born. We decided, right, Rio's a great city, but really expensive. And my wife was working full time. I was working full time. Neither of us had family in Rio, so we moved back to Curitiba for family support for bringing up our son.
So I want to go back at what you touched that says like moving to Brazil is not easy. I want to ask you, because it seems like if you're an English teacher, it will be easy to get a work permit or a permit to work in a country, like in this case, Brazil. So why did you think, or why did you say that Brazil, it's hard to stay and move to Brazil?
Well, a work permit is not easy. It's not easy to get for an English teacher. If you want to move to Brazil, there's a number of different ways you can do it. One of them is through work. But if you want to work in Brazil, you have to have a sponsor. So you have to have a job before you come to Brazil. The employer needs to show that there's nobody else in Brazil with those skills, that there's a need for those skills, that they're paying a salary which is equal to what you were getting, which is very expensive because, a European salary in Brazil is a lot. So it's extremely expensive, very bureaucratic.
So they have to match your salary in the UK?
It doesn't have to be matched, but it has to be similar.
Okay.
The first year I was here, I know they fudged the way it was, the forms and things like this. The second year, I don't remember the details, but I'm not sure there was ever, they entered the paperwork and then it was sent back, and then they entered more paperwork, it was sent back. I don't think it was ever actually finalized whether I was entitled to a visa or not, because they kept delaying and appealing and getting a decision and appealing that decision. I was in Brazil while all that was ongoing. So I'm not sure I don't remember the details about how that ended up. But I knew it was time to go back to Britain at the end of the year's contract, because I remember it still hadn't been sorted at the end of a year.
Okay, so it was challenging, because it seemed like for me, like okay, there's a job opportunity, you can come there, and it seems like if you're an English speaker, you can pretty much go anywhere. But that wasn't the case. It was actually challenging to go back in the same school the second time.
Exactly. Now, in other countries, it's different. For example, to go to Taiwan, all you need to do is, again, you need to have a position, but that's easy to organize in Taiwan. Then you have to have a teaching qualification, for example, CELTA, and you needed to have a degree, a university degree in anything. It could be a university degree in painting, in English, in engineering, anything at all. That was the basic criteria. You needed a position, you needed a teaching qualification, and you needed a degree. I had all those, so it was no problem getting a visa. And the system in Taiwan is very streamlined, so it's very easy to do. I know that's the case in many countries. Thailand is the same, is similar. South Korea was the same. I don't know if it still is. I don't know how it works in South Korea nowadays. But in South America, they tend to be a lot more restrictive of who can come and who can work. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is coming as a student. So you come to Brazil to study. You can work, I think it's 30 hours a week you're allowed to work if you're here as a student. And being a student can be very simple. Just studying Portuguese can qualify you to be here as a student. But it's limited. I think it's 6 months. And then you can apply for an extra 6 months. So it's like basically a maximum of a year. There are other avenues there. So if you're doing a master's or something, there are ways to extend that. But that's very specific to the university has to get involved then if you're doing something formal like that. Another way, there are ways of coming on religious visas and things like this. I don't know much about that. So actually, it's really quite tricky to get into Brazil and teach legally. It's not easy to do.
Okay.
Which I understand, that there are lots of very good Brazilian English teachers. So they don't need loads of British or Americans or Australians coming because that would damage the market for them.
I totally understand it. I get that. But at the same time, I don't know, maybe just my point of view, it seems like if you are an English speaker, even the pronunciation might be, if you learn, at least I might completely wrong here, you can feel free to correct me, but if you're like a learning from an English speaker, maybe the pronunciation is better. Because I remember I can hear my friends in Italy, they learn English from Italian speaker. The pronunciation is different. It's got like this fake Italian accent. While if you learn abroad, or if you learn from an English speaker, the pronunciation and the way you speak is more like closer to an English speaker. So maybe that could be like a reason to hire somebody like you from abroad than having a Brazil's English speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I would say that your accent doesn't really matter. So long as people understand you, that's fine. You know, if you have an Italian accent, great. Italian accents are wonderful. I love an Italian accent if I can understand you. So sometimes the accent is so strong that it interferes with communication. That's a problem. There are regular surveys, not regular, but there are surveys in Britain about what's the sexiest accent. Time and time again, women always say the male French accent is the sexiest accent around. So if I was a French person, would I want to lose my French accent? Probably not.
Exactly.
There are Brazilians who have a very strong accent and it's difficult to understand them. But that's not because their teacher was Brazilian or their teacher was Brazilian or not. That there's a different thing going on there. I love the Brazilian accent when it's spoken to a minimum level that it can be understood. And if you can't be understood, it's probably not your accent. It's probably your vocabulary or your grammar or something that's interfering.
I totally get that. And probably that's a perspective from somebody living abroad, even for myself living abroad, if you feel like a different accent and then it's something interesting. But if I have to put myself back in Italy, if somebody is looking for, I don't know, applying for a job and this Italian is for somebody from Italy, speaks English with a different accent and is non-Italian, I think, at least my perspective could be that it got more chances to get a job just because it sounds more professional, because it doesn't have this Italian accent, but it's got like a more British accent or American accent that seems like more professional in the industry.
Yeah, I get that. Totally get that. I understand that. And if you've got two people are the same, and the difference is that one person sounds better, that person will get the job. I get that. There is a thing in teaching called native speakerism, that native speakers, these are loaded terms. In the industry, there's a big debate about whether we should use not native speaker, but I'm going to use it for us here. An idea that native speakers are automatically better than non-native speakers, the way they're treated, the opportunities they get. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, some of the best teachers I've ever seen have been born in Brazil or born in Poland. And I've learned so much from them. I have worked with English teachers whose English is excellent, absolutely perfect. I've worked with English teachers whose English is not 100%, but it's 95%. And they can more than make up for that with their knowledge of, this is how I learned English. Look, I've done this. And they can show that to their students. They can predict the problems that their students are going to have because they know the features of Portuguese. They know that Brazilian students have a problem with this particular sound. So we need to work on this sound. The book tells me we're going to do this sound, but Brazilian students can do it. So we'll ignore that. When I came to Brazil for my first year, I didn't speak Portuguese. I didn't know what problems my students would have. I remember once I was teaching the present continuous tense, which is I am sitting or he is jumping. And I spent weeks teaching the present continuous to my elementary level students. And after about 3 weeks of this, one student said, it's the same as Portuguese. And it basically is. There are a couple of differences, but basically it's the same as Portuguese. Now, if I'd known that, I could have saved myself and my students 3 weeks of hard work by saying, you see this, I am sitting, same as Portuguese. Let's do it. So I wasted a lot of time there where they could have been learning something else. Nowadays, after 25 years of teaching, I know how to teach. I hope I know how to teach. But at the beginning of my career, I would have chosen, if I was a parent to a child who wants to go to an English school, I would not care so much if the colour of my teacher's passport. I'd want to see, do they have teaching qualifications? I'd want to know what experience they have. I wouldn't be too worried about whether they come from Brazil or the United States. Now, I know that's not the case for most parents, most customers. There's also a certain kudos to having, my son's got a British teacher. My son's being taught by an American. There is a certain amount of kudos there as well. But in terms of actually getting the job done, non-native speaking teachers can be just, or often are, more effective than native speaking teachers.
I totally understand that. And actually, when I was doing some research for this episode, even I came across different sites where they were giving offering a job for teaching English abroad. And most of them were like, one of the requirements you had to come from an English speaker country, either England, America, Australia, New Zealand, whatever, but has to be an English speaking country.
I know some people from Brazil who've managed to get jobs in Europe, but that's often because they have a European passport. So maybe their grandmother was Italian or something like this. So that gives them the right to go and live in Europe. And then once they're there, they can get jobs. The people I know who've done that have all had positive experiences. But it's not easy. Visa processes usually require you to come from an English-speaking country.
Mm-hmm. So for the listener that wants to get on the same path, like starting and learn and teach English abroad, what's the first step do you think they should take in order to get there?
First step is to get an entry-level exam, either CELTA or Trinity College. If you go online, do a Google search for CELTA exam, that's CELTA, you'll find lots of information about it. That's the very first thing you need to do. Originally, CELTA was designed for sort of British American teachers to go off and do a 4-week course before they go off and travel the world. Nowadays, CELTA is also being used to teach Brazilian teachers how to teach, or French teachers how to teach, because it does get you up to a good standard of teaching, especially if you do it part-time. Be careful, there are other courses out there that claim to be good, but they're often not recognized internationally by visa bureaucrats or by schools. So be careful on the course that you choose. The two big ones are Trinity College and the Cambridge University exam. There is a mixture of doing it online. You can choose to do it online, or you can choose to do it in person. They do need to observe your teaching. So there does need to be something where they watch you teaching students, and then they can give you feedback on it. Mm-hmm. So that's the first step. And if you're Brazilian or Italian or something and you have a CELTA, in theory, you can go anywhere in the world. It just depends on your passport status to be able to get a visa.
And to get a CELTA, do you need some requirements? Is there any requirements, maybe like a bachelor degree or something like that, in order to get a CELTA, or not really?
You need to be 18, so you've got to be an adult. You don't have to have a degree. So basically, to do the CELTA, you have to go, before you do the course, you go for an interview at the centre where you're following the course. And they need to determine if they think you have the ability to pass the exam. Because if they take your money from you, they have to think you've got the chance of passing. They can't just take your money and then, he's never going to pass, but we'll take his money anyway. So in that interview, the person interviewing you is looking for things like, right, do you have the time to do this? Have you got the experience to be able to do that? Now, if you have a university degree, that shows you know how to study. If you don't have a university degree, you need to show in some other way that you know how to study, that you can follow a course. So a university degree is not necessary. It often is the case that most people who do this course have a university degree, but it's not a prerequisite, no. Basically, you need to be 18, you need to have the money to pay for the course, you need to pass the interview process, and then you can do it.
Okay. So yeah, seems, I don't know, for me, like I interview other people I spoke with other people that like teach English abroad. It seems like a very easy path to make your first step into a country, because you already get to a country with a job, and most of the time they give you like accommodation, or they help you with accommodation, you got a place to go. It seems pretty easy. So I think that's a great way to make like the first step into the country. And also right now with COVID and everything, a lot of people start teaching online. Yeah. And I've interviewed other people, Jess, on the show before, that she's making extra money on the side just to like teach English online. Do you have any advice, or do you have any resources for people that wants to maybe start doing that on teaching English online?
Okay, so I teach online now. Even before COVID, I was trying to make the transition to teaching online. With COVID, I was forced to accelerate that, obviously. I teach online, and I will not be going back to teaching in person. It's so much easier for me. I have more students. I have more time to myself. The scheduling, everything is just much easier. Most of my classes are teaching one-to-one, so it's just with one person. I have a couple of groups. Groups are more challenging online. The interaction is difficult to replicate. The interaction that you get in a classroom is much more difficult. If you're interested in teaching online, there are different ways of going about it. There are courses you can do that will help you develop some skills, because it's not just the teaching skills. You need to know the resources that are available to you. You need to know how to use Zoom or whatever platform you use. And over the last year, that has proliferated. There's a lot of stuff now to help you teach online. A very good resource to use is the British Council. British Council represents British culture, education, business abroad. And first of all, they have a lot of stuff for students who are learning English, but they also have a lot of stuff for teachers, helping them to be better teachers, lots of resources, and it's totally free. And the British Council, last year, they very quickly put together a lot of stuff to show people how to teach online, to make the best job possible. If you want to teach online, there's different ways you can go about it. Finding your students. There are platforms. One that I've used is called Superprof. I know they have it here in Brazil, and I know they have it in Britain. I assume they have it in other places, where you can register for free and they match. It's sort of like the Uber for teachers. And it's not just for English teachers, it's for any type of teacher, where they can match a teacher to a student. There is a paid version where they will promote you so that you'll get more hits with your students. And there are other platforms like that. Then there are other organizations which they find the students for you. For example, they will say, right, we want you from midday to 4 p.m. and we're going to find you a student in China, or we're going to find you a student in France, and you will teach these students. The pay there is usually a lot less than you get teaching for yourself, but you don't have the hassle of finding students, billing students, organizing students. You just turn up and teach.
Right, and also a way to create your network, and then you got your students, and then you can move.
Yeah. It's a good way to get into it. You get a feel for it. They'll probably give you some sort of training course. Depending on the company that you're with, sometimes it's very restricted. So like you do A, B, C. You don't even have to plan. You go through their plan and you have to follow every step. Other ones they're freer, that you can do more or less what you want. And then there's everything in between. A lot of the customers are sometimes children. So people can specialize in children, teenagers or adults. I do mainly adults and a few teenagers. The way I've gone about it mainly though is I use this Superprof. I didn't get many out of that, but I got a few. But the best way I've found of attracting students is having an online presence. So I have my podcast, which is directed at students. I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook group. I'm on Instagram. I've just recently joined a Discord group. And all of this is helping students. And through that, I've got a lot of students by just having an online presence, a very strong online presence.
Yeah, no, makes totally sense. And for teaching online, do you have the same requirements as teaching like in a school, or it's more like a loose because it's just whoever wants to teach, they can teach kind of thing?
Well, yeah, whoever wants to teach can teach. Because I have this experience and I have the certificates, it's part of my online presence thing. Look, I've got a master's, I've got a diploma. I can probably charge more money than other people who don't have that experience as well. If you're a student looking for a teacher online, be careful. Do your investigations. Don't just accept the first teacher that comes along. Check so I've got all my qualifications digitalized. I can send them to my students or prospective students so they can see that I really do have these certificates and this experience. But yeah, in theory, anybody can set themselves up as an English teacher. There's no one checking. A lot of the sites like Superprof, anybody can do it. But if you've got certificates, you can scan your certificates, send them to Superprof, and then they will give you, they say it's authenticated, that you really do have what you say you have. If you go to an online platform where they organize the students for you, most of them will want to see some evidence that you have experience.
Okay, that was going to be like a way to stand out from the crowd, from other teachers.
Exactly, yes.
I'd like to ask you questions that I wasn't planning to ask you today, but they kind of like now we got like down this path. If you were 22 today, with experience with the technology that we have today, would you go down the same path of teaching in the class and teaching like the path that you went through? Or you just like be kind of like a digital nomad, like traveling around the world and teaching online?
I think I would not like to go straight online. I think the things that I learned in the classroom, teaching groups and teaching, I've taught children as young as 3. I've taught 93-year-old great-grandmothers. I like teaching online. It suits my lifestyle at the moment. But I learned so much by being with people in the classroom. I would not like to skip that part of my career. I don't think I'd be the teacher I am today if I hadn't done that. So if I was 22 again, the only thing I would say to myself is learn the language. Day one, start learning the language. I was often a little bit lazy with that. You know, I was this English person. Everybody speaks English. They can talk English to me. It stops you from mixing in society, the local society. Now I speak Portuguese, and the number one problem that people have when they come to Brazil is not speaking the language. If they get married to someone and they come here, it can be very isolating if you don't speak the language. So that's the only thing I would change, really. When I would say to myself, you're going to Poland, start learning Polish now. You're going to China, start learning Chinese now. Even before you go, start learning the language.
Yeah, that's the only way, at least for me, like to really like a full like lived experience, like a full potential, because that's it. Start communicating. People treat you differently just because maybe you don't speak perfectly, but at least you're trying. And people usually recognize that and have like a different impression of you, and they, I think, like treat you differently, even though you were already like a kind of like a little superstar, a little like important person in the especially in Poland, like in this like a small town. It must have been like such a cool experience as a 22.
To be honest, I hated it.
Really?
Because everybody knew what I was doing. If I went out to a bar and I had a little bit too much to drink, everybody in the town knew about it.
Okay.
You know, I was 22. I was stupid. I did stupid things and everybody knew what I was doing.
And you were a teacher, so you kind of need to be more professional.
Yeah. I remember going into a bar the one night and all my students were there. I stayed. So, yeah. That was another aspect that I didn't like, was everybody knowing me. I'm not that type of person. I do like to be... One of the reasons I like having a podcast instead of a YouTube channel is that, you know, it's more anonymous. I will do some YouTube stuff in the future, but I like the podcast. It's you know, you can hide behind this anonymity.
Yeah, I think we are the same on that perspective. And going back to Brazil and moving to Brazil, because I heard even before I interviewed other people from Brazil that left Brazil because they didn't feel safe, wasn't a safe country, especially if you have family or kids. It's not a safe country to be in. But you've been there for like 10 years or 16 years now. No, 11 years now.
I've been in Brazil for 15 years, 5 years in Rio and 10 years in Curitiba.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the math makes sense. And did you actually find it that not safe, or what was your experience? What was your impression on Brazil over all these years?
So I personally have never had a problem. I've never personally experienced any crime. However, if you're in the wrong place, there is crime. It is a dangerous place. I've heard stories of other Americans or Europeans coming and being robbed and losing things. It's not the safest place in the world. Curitiba, where I live, is a relatively safe place for Brazil. What often happens in Brazil is, if you're in a nice area, it's a nice area. A lot of the crime takes place in poorer areas or in city centres and things like this. It can happen anywhere, and it does happen. I know people who've been held up at gunpoint outside their house and stuff like this. It can happen. For me personally, it hasn't happened, touch wood. But yeah, you need to, I'm a city boy, so I'm always looking around. I pay attention. If there's somebody walking towards me and I don't like the look of them, I turn around, go in a different direction, go into a shop, always paying attention. Doesn't mean you're guaranteed to be safe, because things happen, but it can be a dangerous place. When I was in Rio in the good times. The city was doing well, there was lots of money around, and I was in Zona Sul, in Copacabana, which is the south part of the city, which is a nice area. But I know there are problems even in nice areas in Rio. Rio is a very dangerous city if you go to the wrong place. But fortunately, so far, it hasn't happened to me personally. But you need to be aware of it.
Yeah. And for somebody that are thinking to move abroad, thinking to go to another country, would you recommend Brazil as the first country for like bureaucracy and culture and all of that? Would you recommend as a first country to move to?
I think I I don't know if I'd recommend it, but I wouldn't say it's a bad place to come to as a first country. It would depend on the individual, depend on their language skills. If they've got no Portuguese, Brazil is a country where relatively few people speak English. In Poland, lots of people spoke English. In Taiwan, even though people wouldn't speak English to me, English is part of their education and people would understand if they had to. But Brazil, the level of English is much lower. So it can be much harder to find somebody who speaks English. So if you're coming to Brazil, go to one of the big cities, go to Sao Paulo, go to Rio, and you'll be fine. You will find people to speak English while you learn Portuguese. If you speak Spanish, you'll pick up Portuguese very quickly, or another Romance language, French or Italian or something. You'll pick it up very, very quickly. If the person is looking for an adventure, Brazil is the place to come.
Yeah, Brazil was one of my first options when I decided to leave Italy.
Right.
Because the company I was working for had a branch in Brazil, and that's the first option I tried. I thought was the safest option because I already have a job. They could just send me over. And when I started dreaming about going to Brazil, I always loved, I don't know, there's something about the language. I prefer Portuguese than Spanish. I don't know, seems like more fun as a language. Okay. I love the music and all of that. And so I thought that could be a pretty cool experience. Unfortunately, it didn't go through. Didn't offer me a job. Actually, they told me to quit my job. So I did. But otherwise, that would have been my first option to go to Brazil. I was just fascinated by the country and I still want to go to Brazil and just to live there for a while just because, I don't know, I'm fascinated by the country.
Oh, Brazil is an amazing place. What people often forget, though, is that Brazil is also huge. It's enormous. And people often say there's at least 4 countries in Brazil. So if you're in the south of Brazil, where I am, it's heavily dominated by European immigration. So at the beginning of the 20th century, lots of people came here from Italy, from Ukraine, from Poland. There's Portuguese descendants, there's some Spanish descendants. So there's even a few British people came here. So when you go around the south of Brazil, it's a very European style country. When Brazil had slavery, there was very little slavery in the south. But when you go north of Sao Paulo, and especially up to the northeast, there was a lot of slavery in those areas. Brazil had more slaves than any other country in the world. And so I've been up to the northeast quite a few times and I love it up there, but it's totally different. The culture is different. The music is different. The food is different. It's a lot hotter because you're so much nearer the equator. And it's a lot less dominated by European immigration. It's a lot more people who are forced to come to Brazil through the slave trade. So it just looks different. And then you've got the place like Minas Gerais, more inland, where it's drier and it's all about agriculture and things like this. It's a totally different place. Very few similarities. But, Brazil is bigger than Europe. So you never say that the culture in Finland is the same as the culture in Italy. It's totally different places. People often forget how big, how immense Brazil is.
Exactly. I mean, even for me, when I talk about the culture, I'm talking about the culture in Copacabana, Brazil, Carnival and all that kind of things. Yeah. But as you said, you were quite far from the ocean, you're on the mountain, the weather is different. So it's not not the normal, but the popular idea of Brazil.
No, the stereotype of Brazil is the beach, bikinis, playing football, listen to bossa nova or samba or something like this. This is a stereotype. In any stereotype, there is an element of truth, but that's not the reality for most people most of the time. But Brazil is an amazing place. There's so much energy here. There's so many things to do. We've got everything here. We've got forest, we've got waterfalls, we've got beach, we've got amazing people. There's some terrible people as well, but we've got some of the best people I've ever met are in Brazil. And my city, Curitiba, is it's famous as being one of the most organized cities, the most European of cities. It's clean, it's relatively safe, but it's also pretty cold. It rains a lot. Well, the last 18 months, it's hardly rained. We're having a bit of a drought, but it's a lot wetter, it's a lot grayer. We're about an hour and at least an hour's drive from the nearest beach. So, it's not... And the people here have a reputation for being colder, that it's difficult. They're not as open and as warm as people say from Rio de Janeiro are. And again, there's an element of truth there, but it's not totally true. So, every city, every area has its own uniqueness.
And there's anything in particular you would recommend for people that wants to move to Brazil, things to be aware of, things to do before moving to Brazil?
Get every piece of paperwork you can imagine and then get some more paperwork because it will probably be necessary. Get it photocopied, get it attested so that it's a legal document because the bureaucracy here is incredible. Nowadays, when I have to go and do something, I write, what documents do I need? I get all those. What other documents might I need? Basically, I just bring every piece of paper that I have because they're going to want something else. So get all your paperwork sorted out, photocopied 3, 4, 5 times just in case. Start learning the language, then just come and have a good time and work. People here work. They work really hard. Another stereotype of Brazilians sometimes is they're lazy, they just like to party. It's not true. Brazilians work hard at their jobs. And again, that in itself is a stereotype, but generally people are hardworking here. So if you come in, you're going to work.
And a question about the documents, because I guess everything needs to be translated into Portuguese, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It needs to be translated into Portuguese and it needs to be translated by a sworn translator. So usually that's going to be in Brazil. But your documents, I think some of your documents, like your birth certificate and stuff, needs to be attested by the Brazilian embassy in your home country. And then you also need to have a document from the police saying that you're not wanted by the police. You're not only that you have what your record is, if you have a criminal record or not, but also that you're not wanted by them. There was the great train robber in Britain. This is like 60, 70 years ago. They robbed a train, they killed somebody, one of the guards on the train, and they were arrested, put in prison, but he escaped and he came to Brazil. He got married to a Brazilian. And the constitution here is that the state cannot break up a family. So because he was married to a Brazilian, he could not be extradited back to Britain. Oh. So what they do now is when you're trying to get a visa or trying to get married, you have to have a document from the police saying he is not wanted for anything. So that means that they don't have to go through extradition processes.
Okay, that's an interesting story. If you remember the name, just maybe send me over. I'm just going to add it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Don't need to go crazy right now. I can just add in the show notes later.
His name, man, I'm annoyed with myself that I can't remember that.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, it's a horrible feeling. I know that. I like to wrap this up with a few more questions that I usually ask people.
Okay.
Do you have any regrets about living in UK, living in England?
Sometimes I do, especially this last year and a half with the pandemic. I haven't been able to see my parents or my brother in 2 years. There are things that I miss. I have a niece. I haven't seen my niece. She's nearly 1 year old and I haven't seen her. So that aspect, family and friends, yeah, I miss that. I miss that a lot. And that's a regret. But it was something that, had to be done. Either I would have missed my family or my wife, she would have missed her family. So one of us was going to lose out in some way. It's a lot easier now. When I first moved to Poland, to keep in touch with my family was a letter and occasionally a telephone call. Now, man, 25 years later, we've got the internet, we've got Zoom, we've got everything. So it's a lot easier than it was. But, you still miss that. I don't think I have any real regrets, though, other than that. And if I was to weigh up the balance, no, I've done the right thing. I'm happy with my decision.
And what's the biggest upside about immigrating, about living abroad?
The biggest upside, I think it's the challenge. Nowadays, not so much because I've been here for so long, but it's the challenge. You challenge yourself every day and you learn so much about yourself and you learn about your home country. There's an old poem in English and there's a line from the poem. It says, "What does he of England know if only England he knows?" So if you stay in England your whole life, you don't really know England because you can't compare that with anywhere else. So I've learned about myself, I've learned about my home country, I've learned about my own culture by leaving my home country and my culture. I've still got it, and when this pandemic is over, I'll go back for a long holiday in Britain. But it's the challenge and the things that you learn by leaving your country.
Yeah, I love that. So do you think do you fulfill your desire of traveling, or you still have more traveling in you to do?
Well, I taught in 3 countries. I also taught in Russia, but that was just for a couple of months. So it was a temporary thing. I've traveled all over Brazil. I mean, Brazil, you can spend your whole life going around Brazil. But, maybe at the beginning, I thought I would have taught in more countries, more places. But I got to Brazil and I stayed here. But there's always the chance. There's a possibility I could spend some time in Argentina in the not too distant future. No, basically, I'd like to travel more. There's a lot of other places I'd like to go to and visit. But what I've learned by living in a place is that just going for a week, although it's great to go to visit a new country for a week, you don't really know the place until you've spent some considerable time there. And it's great. If there's no alternative, a weekend in Buenos Aires is great, but I would love to spend 6 months a year in Argentina. I really would.
Yeah, no, totally. Otherwise, it's like reading a book by looking at the cover and looking at the back. You don't really know what is actually inside.
Totally.
Do you feel lucky to be an immigrant?
As a white male European, yeah. It's interesting. You're using the word immigrant. In English, we often use the word expat. Mm-hmm. And this has a positive connotation. And we always talk about ourselves as expats. And immigrants that has a negative connotation. I am an immigrant. And I have to remind myself that I'm an immigrant, not an expat. Because expat is white, Europeans, rich, this type of thing. I also think you have a different mindset when you think about yourself as an immigrant. An immigrant, you come and you're going to live there. And you are going to be part of the local community. An expat, well, I'm still English, I keep myself separate from the local community. So I am an immigrant and I am happy to be an immigrant. I bring a skill set, not just with my teaching English, but my ideas about how to do things, my ideas about culture, my ideas about education, about what it means to be a good person. I bring that to people here, and it might be the wrong ideas, but at least it's something that people can learn from me as much as I learn from them.
It's kind of like a part of your job, like bringing the culture, the English culture to other people. That's part of your job, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do that as my job, but I think I also do it just by going out to a bar and meeting people in a bar, or the way that you live and the way that you interact with people. But that, at the same time, I've changed. When I first came to Brazil, I was punctuality. You have to be punctual. 2:00 means 2:00. That's a totally foreign concept to most Brazilians, especially in their social lives. At work, no, they are much more punctual, but in their social lives, no. So I've had to change the way that I deal with scheduling and times. Not work professionally. My class starts at 2:00. But, we're going out for a meal, 7:00, maybe 7:00. Could be 7:30, perhaps 8. You never know. So, yeah, it works both ways.
I just want to precise something that you touched, the difference between expat and immigrant. And I don't like the word immigrant either. And that's why I called my podcast Emigrant, because I think there's a big difference between immigrant and immigrant. As you said, immigrant is always like a negative connotation. People see immigrant like people coming into our country and stealing our job. And it's not like a good connotation, but immigrant, which is for me, that's most important than being an immigrant, is like be an immigrant. Means that you decide to leave your country to move somewhere else. So you are an immigrant. You've been labeled immigrant when you land in a country, but we are immigrant. And that's, for me, that's
I like that.
the thing they want to emphasize, the things they want to highlight, not the fact that we are immigrant and we are guests in a new country. We are somebody that got to make the decision to leave.
It'd be interesting to see the collocation with immigrants. So collocation is words that go together. So I might do this after our chat. I'll go online and see what words often come with immigrants. And I'm betting there'll be words like crisis and stuff like this. So the way the word is used is often in a negative way, People often don't talk about the positives associated with emigration or immigration. People tend to focus on the negatives.
Correct me if you're an English teacher, but even the word immigrant is not that popular. I even spoke with other English speakers, and it's Daniel, what's the difference between immigrant and immigrant? So I have to tell them the difference. It's not very common. It probably is not good for my podcast to be discovered out there, but I probably didn't pick the right name. But it's not very common to avoid the word immigrant.
Yeah, absolutely, because the people who talk about it are usually the people who are the host country, and so it's about people coming here. It's not about people going somewhere else. But I've heard friends and even some family members talking, oh, bloody immigrants. And then I just, hang on a minute, I'm an immigrant. Oh, but that's not the same. Well, my dad's an immigrant. My dad was born in Ireland and he emigrated to Ireland, to the UK at a very young age. I've got an uncle who was born in Jamaica and he moved to Britain when he was 18 or something like this. My city has a very multicultural. We've got lots of different colours, races and everything. And that's one of the things that I miss about Britain. It's, here in Brazil, we've got people of African descendants, we've got European descendants, there's the native indigenous Brazilians. But the recent immigration hasn't really happened. So we don't get these different, just like different restaurants, different styles of food. We don't get different stuff. It's much more restricted. Maybe in Rio and Sao Paulo you get that, but not so much here in Curitiba.
Another thing that I found interesting about immigration and people out to see immigrant, we are recording this podcast, this episode during the Olympics. And I found like people are negative about the immigrant. But if it's somebody that's an immigrant and like plays into your team, into your national team and wins a gold, that's seen as a good thing. Oh, it's good. It's like a part of like our culture. It's part of, I don't know, it's English, it's British, or it's Italian, or it's their countries from their countries, from my country, just because he won a gold medal for my country, even though he's coming from somewhere else. But because he plays for our team, it's part of our team. It just seemed like it differently. It's funny. I'm
not sure I should mention this to you in particular, but the recent Euro football competition, which Italy won against England in the final, but we won't mention that. Half of the England team could have chosen to play for another country. So that means that either their parents or their grandparents were born in a different place. So that's how much immigration is affecting England in particular. And for me, it's great. I love it. More of it. Bring it on.
Yeah, probably those players couldn't play for the Italian team, so they couldn't win.
Yeah, maybe they made the wrong choice.
Sweet. So I just want to give like a shout out before we wrap this up for like your podcast that you're helping other people learning English, and it's called English with Stephen. And what I love about your podcast that you're not just like a teaching English, just like a teaching new words. There's like always like some stories behind the word. So for me, like what I love about it is like it's much easier to remember a word if you remember a story, because it's easier to remember, like associate that word with a story than actually, okay, this is the word, this is the meaning, okay, next word and next meaning. It's just like, I love the work you're doing. So for the listener out there that wants to improve their English or they want to teach English, just check it out. You will find the links in the show notes. It's totally worth it. So I just want to point that out before we wrap this up.
Thank you very much. It's nice to hear positive feedback. Thank you.
No, as I say, I love it. And if people wants to get in touch with you, where people can find you and where people can get in touch with you?
The most obvious place is my site, which is englishwithstephen.com. But I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. Everything is English with Stephen. Facebook, Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I don't really use Twitter a lot, but if someone sends me a message, I'll get a notification. And again, that's English with Stephen. But yeah, my site is probably the easiest way to find me. Leave a message there and I'll be back in touch.
Sweet. As usual, all the links and everything will be in the show notes for people to find you more easily. Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen, for taking your time and share your story and knowledge. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Not a problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, no worries. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning in this week and stick until the end. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stephen. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. And if you did, please share this episode with your friends and consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. You can find the links and resources mentioned in this episode in the show notes by visiting immigrantslife.com/episode 54. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at @immigrantslife and Facebook at @immigrantslife podcast. And one last important thing, if you want to move to a new country or you need help, feel free to reach out to me either via email at daniel@immigrantslife or through our website, immigrantslife.com. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you in the next one. Ciao.